My guest today is Greg Isenberg. He's the founder of holding company of internet businesses, which does 8 figures in revenue. And to be even more specific, holding company of community-based internet businesses. Thanks a lot, Greg, for coming to the HoldCo Builder show.
Stoked to talk all things holding companies with you.
Perfect. Let's start with you sharing your background, starting all the way from graduating from university.
Well, the first thing is I went to university, but I never graduated. So I'm Canadian. I went to a school called McGill University. It's one of the best schools in the country. I was studying computer science, but I was building startups while I was doing it. And I remember it was in 2008, 2009. App Store had just come out, and I was designing and building mobile apps. And I remember going to my one of my programming classes and asking my teacher why we weren't learning Objective-C. Objective-C was the programming language of the time that helped build mobile apps. And he was like, oh, that's not going to make it into the course curriculum for 5 or 10 years. And I just remember thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. Here we're on the cusp of one of the greatest paradigm shifts ever, the mobile phone app store, and we're learning to develop for desktop software. Like, desktop is about to die. And that, along with one of my businesses starting to take off, was when I realized, you know what, I can learn more outside of school than I can inside of school. And I dropped out. So since then, it's been a journey of venture-backed startups. I've started 3 venture-backed startups, sold all 3. My last exit was to WeWork, which was famous for raising, I think, $20+ billion and spending all of it. Their market cap today is $280 million. So that's a big change. And that has led me to my HoldCo, or what I call multipreneurship journey, owning a portfolio of internet-based businesses where we're bootstrap or self-funded.
Maybe talking a little bit about the VC-backed startups you founded, because as you said, you've sold 3 businesses. Obviously, you know something which many people don't, because they try and keep starting those different businesses, different ideas, different niches, and they pretty much fail, like 100%. What did you learn from the first one, which helped you to fund and start the second one and the third one?
I mean, the game of entrepreneurship is like, people think it's like maybe a linear graph, but it's really more, in terms of learnings, but it's really more of like a step function. So I feel like every startup that you do, you have just this massive fire hose of learnings that come to you. So the massive fire hose of learnings I had from startup 1, and the big step I made was selling too early. So I started the business and I sold it 11 months after I started it to a company called Stumbleupon, which at the time was one of the largest social networks at the time. It was actually started by Garrett Camp, the co-founder of Uber. It was a great experience. I raised a little bit of venture for it. I sold it. But from that, I actually moved to San Francisco. And our board of directors of Stumbleupon, who I worked very closely with, were these legends. These guys like Ram Shriram, who's on the board of Google, David Hornick, Samir Gandhi from Excel, like these legends. I got to really learn, and I had another step function where I realized I wasn't thinking big enough for startup number 1. So then I started another one and started another one. But yeah, I think the biggest learning was just that a startup isn't one big learning. It's really just a fire hose of learnings, and it's something that isn't like a book where there's an end to a book. It just can it continues, continues, continues. And for example, like I just came out of love him or hate him, but there's, a motivational speaker called Tony Robbins that I was just at an event with him. And the guy's worth almost $1 billion, and he's actually a HoldCo entrepreneur, a multipreneur. He's got 100+ companies that he co-owns. And it's like, why does a guy like that still, like, he's still doing these seminars? Like, why is he still working so hard, flying around? He was in, Europe last week. Why is he working so hard? Is because he loves the step function. Like, he's addicted to the step function, and I'm sure he also loves providing value. But yeah, I'm obviously not comparing myself to Tony Robbins, but I am comparing the journey that I have had. It has been a step function each way.
Okay, and seeing the ins and outs of the VC world and having 3 successful exits under your belt, as I understand now, you're more into agency type businesses. How did that change happen?
Yeah, so we run about 6 businesses. We do, most of our businesses have services as a part of them. That being said, like, we also have software businesses. We also have just pure community businesses. We also have education businesses. I think agencies are a really good way to learn a set of problems in a space. So, if you start a design agency and you're designing mobile apps, you could very quickly understand what are the problems that brands, companies, startups are facing to design their apps. And then from that, you can actually create startups that are software based that could be bigger. What have I really learned is the importance of cash flow. When you're building a venture-backed startup, cash flow is not in the dictionary. Dividends is not in the dictionary. And this step function of the journey I'm on, I'm really trying to learn about profitability, unit economics, diversification, dividends, free cash flow, which has typically, I mean, the word free cash flow obviously wasn't important when you, for example, sell a company to WeWork. I don't think the business was constructed in a way where they were focusing on profitability and focusing on free cash flow. Yeah, that's the reason why I'm interested in services. 1, cash flow. 2, it's a quick way to learn about problems.
I've been following this guy, Nathan Latka, for a few years because the software world has always been quite interesting for me, even though I'm pursuing another opportunity. What he have said many times, that the agency owners turn out to be the best SaaS founders because, as you just mentioned, they see all the problems and everything. And it's interesting that you took pretty much the opposite route, seeing the ins and outs of the software and the tech businesses, and you went into agency businesses. Now, you mentioned you're having 6 businesses in the portfolio. Why not just focusing on one, which probably you can see the numbers, you can see the free cash flow on month-to-month basis. Why don't you just focus on one?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. So the first reason is it's a lot more fun to be involved in multiple businesses than one business. There's a larger amount of problems. There's more creativity that you can solve, or you just get to be more creative because you're in different lanes and you're learning about these different businesses. So for example, like, we have one business, boringmarketing.com, which is this boring way to acquire customers and revenue. And I've learned a ton about SEO through that, and I always thought, SEO is like, who cares about SEO? But turns out it's an incredible way to wake up every single morning and have customers lining at the door for free. So that's been really cool to just learn. So number 1, I think the creativity and learning is fun. Number 2, I have operators who are running these businesses. I don't feel as if like, to me, I'm focusing on one. I'm focusing on the holding company. You know what I mean? It's only that the holding company has multiple products. So I feel very focused. It's just I'm focused on, like, my main role is recruiting and incubating and hiring operators and coaching and advising our operators so that, you know, they feel supported and are supported.
How much the fun plays part of what you do on day-to-day basis? Because reading your tweets as well, it seems like you're seriously excited and happy doing what you're doing. How much the fun plays a part of everything?
Fun is 95% of it. We often have opportunities that come to us. Large funds want to invest, private equity funds want to partner, and we don't say no to them. Just if they email us, we'll review every opportunity, but a lot of the times they aren't good fits because we feel as if we're having a lot of fun doing what we're doing. We don't want to break something that's working. We feel very much like we have product market fit in what we're doing and that we need to just scale it. Like, life's too short not to have fun doing what you're doing, especially as you get into your 30s and 40s. So, like, my 20s was just really about how do I learn as much as possible and win as much as possible. That was like kind of my, go big or go home. And when COVID hit, I'm 34 now, but when COVID hit, it really started, I think a lot of people, we all started to rethink, like, oh, wow, like, I don't want to just do a role that is going to make me a lot of money. I don't want to do a role because it's going to give me a lot of status. I want to do a role that is also, as Warren Buffett says, allows me to tap dance to work every day. And, like, building this holding company has been the highlight of my career, period. It's been the most fun thing I've ever done by an order of magnitude.
That's awesome. You mentioned creativity and being creative. What I found from you sharing on Twitter was you said creative people need time to sit around and do nothing. How do you do that, Greg?
Lots of ways. I'll give you an example. So it's, this morning when I woke up, I had breakfast and I made a conscious effort to not have my phone with me, not have my laptop, but to read a magazine from start to finish. And the magazine wasn't a business magazine. It wasn't a news magazine. It was just like a almost entertainment magazine that talked about restaurants and culture. And probably spent an hour reading it. So you might go on Twitter and see people being like, it's this hustle culture, right? Like, wake up 4 a.m, do a cold plunge, work out for 90 minutes, get in front of the computer, 2 hours of deep work. And, like, listen, that to each their own. For me, what I found most effective is to do things like wake up, have breakfast, and read a magazine that has nothing to do with your business. And you'd be surprised with what connections that makes in your brain. I've never worked harder than 50 hours a week in my life, period. And you're from Europe, so maybe that's, like, obvious. But in America, a lot of people, especially in startup land, are working 70, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. I think that the way to unlock creativity isn't by working super long, but it's very much in understanding how your brain works, putting yourself in situations that let your brain connect and fire, such as, like, reading this magazine or going for walks or biking, going for a bike ride, and removing yourself from technology in a lot of ways. Like I'm very extreme. I'm either like off technology or really in technology in these focused times. So that's been my philosophy on why I think creative people, it's really important to do nothing a lot, because I think that's really going to present to you some of your most interesting ideas.
You're mentioning that you are focusing on one thing and one thing only, and you have operators on each of the business, on education business, community business, software business, service type business. How do you find these people, and how do you motivate them? How do you incentivize them? Or you don't really need to motivate them because there are people like you, they really enjoy what they're doing, they're having fun. And again, how do you find those people?
How do I find these people is by Twitter. So the greatest reason to create content on Twitter is to find high quality talent. So I posted a few weeks ago, here's like the 10 roles we're hiring at late checkout. Chief of staff, we're hiring 3 designers, we're hiring 3 writers, we're hiring like all these different roles. Sales executive, VP of sales, and just like listed it all out. The tweet had like, I don't know, 300, 400, 500,000 impressions. We had hundreds of high quality people reach out. Now think of the alternative. What do you do, if you're trying to find people if you don't have an audience? Well, you might go onto LinkedIn or something, pay to post, and then you get a bunch of people apply for sure. But it's a very different person. The people that applied to the post that I did, they have been following the journey for 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months. They've been reading the newsletter, my newsletter that I post. So they've already understand, what's the difference between an audience and a community? How do I think about building a community-based product? Why to build a productized agency? How to just all of these lessons. So when they show up to the interview, it's almost like they're trained for the job, the majority of them. And it makes the process for not only finding, but closing some of these candidates way, way, way quicker and easier. And these employees end up are just happier, and they stay longer because they really understand the mission. So I can't imagine hiring if you don't have an audience.
When it comes to audience, just wanting to ask from you in a second, but my craziest story so far has been, for me, I started last year, October, November, posting what I'm doing on day-to-day basis, doing cold calls, talking with small businesses, getting rejected, finding investors, losing investors. And now the last month has been quite crazy. Some compounding has been happening, and people have started reaching out, and it's been going so far that now in the beginning of September, actually people from other country, people from London will fly to where we are, and they want to look at the businesses, and they're very interested in investing into our market, into our opportunity. What has been the craziest connection you've been able to make, or a story that came from building publicly, sharing your thoughts on Twitter?
I'll give you two. I'll give you 2 stories over the last few months that have happened, and this is just the most recent ones. So one is Jeff Bezos, I think that's how you pronounce it, liking one of my tweets and following me, and DMing with him and having a DM conversation with him. I think, like, what kind of world does that happen where you can literally be on the toilet, tweet something, walk to your kitchen, and then you're having a conversation with Jeff Bezos from the founder of Amazon. The second is Mark Benioff CEO, founder of Salesforce.com, sending his tweet to some other executives at Salesforce, as like, hey, you should read this. Mark Benioff, one of the most powerful people in technology, again, like so crazy that I could again write something, have a thought, and that he thinks it's so important that his executives need to read it. That's really the power of Twitter. And I think the mistake a lot of people make with Twitter is they try to build, 100,000 people audience, 1 million people audience, and sell them a $10 Gumroad product when they should be thinking about how can I get 10 people and sell them $1 million product, a $10 million product, a $100 million product.
Good idea, actually. I was thinking of asking you something about building communities and what type of products you should sell them, but what you just said, there is the answer. And this is something very interesting because my girlfriend pretty much every second day complains that I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter. And now the last month I've been sharing with her that you see what happens. This guy just DM'd me. He works in this famous family office, and now you see things like this happen. And in the beginning, it was very hard for me to find a reason why do I spend so much time there. But now it becomes easier and easier because some real things happening and some real people reaching out to me.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about what you're building is you have the opportunity to attract some of these Jeff Bezos type people, family office type people, HoldCo investors, entrepreneurs. So it's a very high quality, high value audience. And the question for you ultimately becomes like, what's the product that I could sell that group of people that would create the most amount of value?
Yes, and this actually was at the end of this podcast, I wanted to ask, what would you do in this situation? Because I've been playing the long game, not asking pretty much anything from the audience, and people have just reached out. And as I said, people wanting to come and visit the businesses we are trying to acquire. Obviously, there are some other products and services we could sell to them as you're doing some type of services and what some other people are doing on Twitter. Would you even spend time on this, or you would just do the main thing?
Well, if I were you, I would spend all of 2023 still just 100% of your energy producing as much value as you can for the audience. So you're still early in the life cycle of the account I mean, you're doing it, right? You're creating a podcast, you're creating incredible tweets. I think just like making sure that you're really, really giving a lot of value this year, I think is going to pay off. But in the back of your mind, I think thinking about, writing out a list, and I think this is helpful not just for you, but for anyone, which is, what are the products that you could be building, and then sorting them by impact. So of course you can create a hat that says Private Equity Guy on it and sell it for $20, but the impact of that is low. You can go and potentially create an M&A advisory firm, and the impact of that is high. So my advice to you would be, spend 90% of your energy delivering value to the audience so that you can earn their trust and ride the momentum, and then spend 10% of your time listening to the audience, sort of teasing them with, hey, if I built this, is this interesting to you? And prioritizing a list of 5 or 10 products sorted by impact. And then towards the end of 2023, that's when I'd start actually building that product.
And finding the operators, you would probably I should probably do something similar, like you did, just posting on Twitter that we are looking for XYZ people who can do this and that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I will say that I generally believe that you should be the operator first before you hire the operator. So, I have a call right after this with the car dealership guy. I don't know if you've seen him on Twitter, but he posted last night saying that he loves what he does, but things are growing so fast and he's looking for a CEO for his company. And makes sense. Like, he's built a lot of product market fit with his audience. He's given a lot of trust to his audience. He's now a bit further along than you are, in the sense that he's got 2 or 3 different products. He's got a private community. He's got some tools that he's building, and he's like, okay, now I'm ready for an operator. And I saw his post, again, had hundreds of thousands of impressions, if not more, and tons of people are applying to this job. I'm sure he had 1,000 people reply to this job. But he knows exactly what to tell that operator. If you think of a business, like, let's say you're in the fashion business and you're making t-shirts and sweaters, let's say you own Supreme, the clothing brand. Like, you need to sweep the floors of the warehouse, and you need to, knit some sweaters, and you need to, be in marketing. Like, you really need to understand all levels of the chain to understand, okay, now I understand how this machine works. I can go and hire an operator because I understand how all the pieces work. If you just only worked in marketing, or you only worked in sewing, or you only worked in sweeping, you might not have a full picture of how it works. So I think that's a mistake that a lot of HoldCo entrepreneurs make, is they're just like, oh, an operator will figure that out. An operator will figure that out. But often the best operator to begin with is you initially, and then you can hire yourself out.
Now, talk a little bit about the building the audience and the community. You've said that the audience listens and the community interacts, shares, and grows together. Can you share more about your thoughts about this? Because I see a lot of people on Twitter as well, and I did it. For example, I was just posting. I never. People reached out to me, said, and asking, like, to have a newsletter where you share something more specific and more in details and more in depth. And there were some newsletter agencies who reached out to me that they would do that for me. And then now, 2 months ago, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And every Thursday, 11 p.m., I'm sending out a newsletter. And I've been doing that for 8 straight weeks now. Obviously, it takes a lot of effort and commitment, but I believe the writing and thinking had made me a better investor and better decision maker. But can you maybe share more about the difference between having a great audience and the difference between having a great community?
Absolutely. So to me, the way I see an audience and the way I see a community is very different. An audience to me is like a hotel, and a community to me is like an apartment building. An audience, when you think of a hotel, you like check into your hotel, and then you might, let's say you're visiting Miami, where I live. You check into Miami Beach. Then you're like, okay, I'm gonna go on the, you drop your stuff. You might, go to the beach. You might go for dinner, and then you might come back. Maybe you have a drink, or at the hotel bar. But maybe you're just going home and you're just waiting to go to sleep so you can leave and go to your next, maybe your flights in the morning. It's quite a transactional experience that happens within a hotel. It's not like you're going to go to your next door neighbor and knock on their door and be like, hey, do you want to hang out? That would be a weird thing to do. When you contrast that to an apartment building is different, because you share a neighborhood, you share a common goal of being safe and secure. There's tons of examples of and at least in my life of like, oh, maybe there's a hurricane and, we're texting each other, making sure everyone's okay. There's just a lot more communication and camaraderie that exists within an apartment. And that is true with a community. A community is something that people agree to grow together. A hotel is something, again, that's very transactional, that like, the way to tell if you're running an audience is if you just stop creating content, you'll stop getting any sort of engagement. But a community is something that could go on long after the creator or the leader creating content. And oftentimes what happens is you have people within the community creating content. So why I'm so bullish and interested in community and having communities as a part of the products that we build is we find that what ends up happening is these community members get nurtured. So we bring them in as audience. So we attract them through an audience creating content. And then we essentially nurture them through community to be more hardcore, more power members of the mission that we're going after. So, for example, if it's boringmarketing.com and it's this idea around how do you find boring ways to grow your business, why not have a private community where people are sharing tips and tricks around different ways that they're growing their business. It really increases the trust. It also makes it a way more defensible business against competition. And you also just see your audience numbers go through the roof too. For example, Alex Hermosi did this like huge webinar event the other day, and it felt like a community event in a lot of ways. There was a lot of different IRL physical meetups that people were watching. The Zoom chat was going live too. And if you look at the likes and replies that Alex Hermosi got before and after the event, it's an order of magnitude higher after the event. He's gone from getting hundreds of likes per tweet to thousands instantly per tweet. And that's because of he's transitioning from an audience to a community. So yeah, that's my take on audience versus community.
Now, one part of the communities is obviously build trust, as you said, and the defensibility against the competitors. How important it is to get your customers from online to offline? Because I found a tweet you did, I think it was a few weeks ago, where you mentioned that in 2012 you took a part of the founder retreat. And from this meeting, there were many people who now built billion-dollar companies, who have raised hundreds of millions, or took companies from idea to IPO. How you see all this taking the audience, taking the people, taking the connections from online to offline?
I just think that, well, there's a few parts of that. One, I think, is how important is offline when it comes to building a business. So, the tweet that you're referencing was in 2012. Me, Dario Melli, the co-founder of Hootsuite, Sean Puri, My First Million, and a few other entrepreneurs got together and we started doing this thing where we would spend 3 days together in LA. We got a private chef and a beautiful house in Santa Monica, and we just helped each other with our businesses. And I don't think I would be here today if it wasn't for what I learned in those events. We're so used to now like being on Zoom and just calling people and tweeting, but there's nothing that could be substituted for being IRL. And that's why it's really cool that there's now, it feels like people are starting to see the value of like intimate, not just a group chat with other HoldCo entrepreneurs, but intimate like events and dinners and stuff like that that bring people together. I think it couldn't be more crucial. And it's the reason why I started multipreneurship.com, which is a private community for, invite only private community for the top HoldCo multipreneurship entrepreneurs, is just because, frankly, I want to speak with the top people in the world and I want to learn from them and I want to teach them too. And I think the it's been so valuable. So that's one piece, which is, how is IRL important to yourself as an entrepreneur and investor? I think mega important. And then there's the other piece of that, which is, how is IRL important just for your own business or businesses to generate more trust, right? So if you're building a community, people think like, oh, I'll just create a digital community, I'll just create whatever. No, like there's the real world. We can't forget that there's the real world, and there's tons of ways that you can activate people within the real world to feel more connected to your brand. And I actually think that that's highly underrated. IRL physical events are a highly underrated way to build community and connection to your brand.
How did you guys got together? I mean, now it's reasonably easy in a way that people have been following you. You just post that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Because having such a high success rate, again, all those people you just mentioned, they were so-called special people,
They weren't back then.
Okay.
I mean, I think they definitely were really, really smart. And, the biggest person back then is, we had like the anchor person, which was the co-founder of Hootsuite, Dario Melli. But like Sean Puri back then was Sean Puri, Greg Isenberg back then was just Greg Isenberg. Like, we were no ones. But we, I had met some of these people. Rob Sandy was another guy who has a company called vidIQ now, which is one of the top creator tools that exists. But he was just a guy who just gone through an accelerator in San Francisco. Like, we just brought together the people that we thought were really interesting. None of us had followings at the time. I think I had like a couple thousand followers maybe. So, the takeaway for people here is that you don't need the biggest names. It does help if you have one anchor name, but I will say that you don't need the biggest names. You just need interesting people.
An interesting post you did, and I think it got hundreds of thousands of impressions. You said you get an acquisition offer. It's $20 million. You have 30 minutes to decide if you take it or not. You're building a holding company and own 100% of the business. You're having the most fun you've ever had and see no signs of it stopping, only the opposite. So what is it you do? Yes or no?
No way, man. Like, if you're asking me, the answer is no. It's a bit of it's kind of a bit of, it's an interesting question because it doesn't include profit or revenue, right? Which is the key thing, right? Are you doing 10 million in profit a year? Of course not. Of course, you wouldn't do 2x, right? Are you doing 1 million in profit? But even if you're, my answer is, even if I was doing, 1 million in profit or 0 in profit, if you're having the most fun in your life, as long as you can make a comfortable living and as long as you can see the path towards compounding, then keep going. As you said earlier on in this pod, you didn't expect Private Equity Guy to grow as quick as it has, and it's been compounding. And that's what happens with a lot of these businesses now, right? So even if you're, I only have a 500K of profit, 300K of profit, 700K of profit, what have you learned, right? What have you learned? And how could you apply those learnings to go 2x, 3x, 4x as fast next year? And like I said in the beginning, it's a step function. So, you'll step function your way into a bigger holding company. And that's why I love holding companies so much, because you you could grow quite quickly, provided you find the right companies to buy or the right, businesses to incubate. So my answer is no. Having fun, underrated.
I learned so much from you from this short 45-minute call. The biggest thing is just seriously, as you said, having fun. Once you have fun, you can say no to offers like this, and you can just keep building the business. Being 34, I'm 30. I think the goal now is to just find the thing which I find fun, and I believe I found it. So now it's just keep building this and just compounding it pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all you need is time and focus and prioritization, right? You need time because you're going to let the compounding do its work. You need focus because you do need to show up every, at least 5 days a week, show up 8 hours a day to get your task done. And you need prioritization because you need to be focusing on the right things. It's not that you don't want to be focused on things that are going to be low or medium impact. It's all about the highest impact things. So if you it's really, entrepreneurship and especially multipreneurship is a mix of those three things. And if you can do that, then and just remain healthy and remain happy, then the world is your oyster. The world is your oyster.
Greg, let's wrap up with a famous five.
All right.
How old are you?
I'm 34.
Favorite book?
I'll give you my favorite book of the last 3 months. The creative, I think it's called The Creative Act. Yeah, by Rick Rubin.
Married, single, kids?
Engaged. No kids.
What car do you drive?
A Volvo S90.
What's the best investment advice you've ever got?
Trust your gut, ignore everything else.
Perfect. Where can people find you?
Best place to find me, I'm on Twitter at Greg Isenberg, GregisEnberg. But best place I would say is my email newsletter that I send once a week, which is latecheckout.substack.com. And I appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Craig. And that's it. Thanks a lot.